Hi, and welcome back to the Woman Worriers podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Cush, and I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor in Annapolis, Maryland. These days, doing therapy online all the time. It feels as if the safety of clients, the safety of myself and community means that I need to do sessions online, and I'm okay with that. I do miss the face-to-face. I do miss my office, which I get to record from, so I still get to see it and be in it. But I do miss the regularity of seeing clients and walking into my office and spending time with my other fellow office mates who share space with me. I hope that you all are doing okay. I hope that you are making it through this difficult time. I am hanging in there myself and doing the best that I can. So today, my guest is Rebekah Shackney, and we are going to be talking about dialectical behavioral therapy and borderline personality disorder. And Rebekah shares with us some of her insights into the struggles of people who suffer from borderline personality disorder. So Rebekah Shackney is a licensed clinical social worker who graduated from the University of Michigan and went on to earn a postgraduate certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, and imaginary exposure for post-traumatic stress disorder. She worked for several years at New York Presbyterian Hospital on an acute care unit where she helped establish an inpatient dialectical behavioral therapy program. Now she is a psychotherapist in private practice with an office in Ossining, New York. She is also the host of the podcast called A Therapist Takes Her Own Advice, which I was fortunate enough to be a guest on. So I'm excited to have Rebekah here. I think sometimes borderline personality disorder is often a very misunderstood diagnosis, and Rebekah is going to shed some light on that and give us some tips on how therapy works and why it's effective. Let's get started. Hi, Rebekah. Welcome to the Woman Worriers podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Biz.
Oh, I'm really excited. It was really fun to be on your podcast. So it's always great to have someone who I've already had a conversation with on the podcast because I feel like it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. This is my first time doing someone else's show, so
yeah, it's exciting. A different experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being the guest versus the host. Yeah. Well, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you and what's inspired you to do the work that you do?
So I am Rebekah Shackney. I am a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in Ossining, New York. I'm a wife, a mom, and I'm originally from Oklahoma, where I have a degree in theater. And so I moved to New York and I worked in theater for a while and realized that and theater is a really stressful and really volatile career. And so I realized if I was going to work with people who are crazy, I'm going to need to know what I'm doing. And of course, that's my joke. Yeah. It was very volatile. The people were very volatile, and it was an interesting way of experiencing the world. The people were very up and down emotionally, and I really got the feeling that if I was going to work with crazy people, I wanted to know what I was doing. So I went to social work school. Yeah. So anyway, I graduated from the University of Michigan and I started applying for jobs. I wanted to work at a teaching hospital. And I got a job at New York Presbyterian Hospital on a personality disorder unit. It's the unit where Cornell medical residents or psychiatric residents are taught about personality disorder. So I really fell into this work by happenstance.
But boy, talk about getting out of school and jumping in with both feet, right?
Yeah, no, that was really, it was quite a shock to the system, but I really loved working in an acute care psychiatric facility. And over the years, I worked there for several years, and I was able to help them set up a DBT program on the unit, like a short-term brief program, because the stays were short. So, but I also got them to train me. So they paid for training, which was great.
Wow. Wow. So for listeners who might not know what DBT or dialectical behavior therapy is, could you just give us an explanation or a definition of what
Absolutely,
that is? Yeah.
sure. So DBT is a model of therapy created by Marsha Linehan, and it was specifically created to help people with borderline personality disorder and chronic suicidal and self-injurious behaviors, because up to that point there was no effective treatment for those folks, and it's a very, very painful, difficult mental illness. And so this model of therapy has 4 different modules that teach skills to help people manage their lives more effectively. And they can really be effectively treated and go on to live their lives, create a life worth living. So that's really the point behind DBT. So it's broken up into 4 modules. Distress tolerance helps you learn to tolerate distress without doing something dramatic, without making a suicidal gesture or something like that. Distress tolerance skills also help you accept reality as it is. So, which we all can use, I feel like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
And I guess too, like the self-injury, like not cutting or hurting yourself, not necessarily suicidal. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's real. A lot of the maladaptive behaviors that people with borderline personality disorder use are just ways of dealing with crisis or dealing with really intense emotional pain. And, it's really their deep desire to feel better, but it's just directed in a way that's not effective, So, I mean, for instance, self-injury, when you cut yourself, there's actually a lot of feel-good chemicals that go into the body, and people who have borderline personality disorder often feel a sense of calm. So whereas, of course, that's not a way to manage your emotional distress for your whole life, it's understandable that people who are in such pain want to feel better.
Right.
And so the distress tolerance skills really help them, give them other tools to use, validate that, yes, I get you want to feel better. And here's something else. May not be as effective immediately, but if you try it and you really get used to it, it will not be as problematic in your life, over the long haul.
Yeah.
So there's also emotion regulation skills. So people with borderline personality disorder have a lot of problems with emotional volatility and just regulating their emotions. So when something happens, they react a lot faster than most people, and it takes them a lot longer to get back to an even keel emotionally. So the emotion regulation skills teach them about their emotions. Why do we have emotions? Why do we need emotions? And then it gives them skills to modulate their emotions more effectively, so they don't feel like they're at the mercy of their emotions so much.
Like not quite as reactive, but just, I totally get that.
Because a lot of people who have borderline personality disorder are emotionally sensitive, and that's part of who they are. It's like, like your eye color or your hair color. Being emotionally sensitive is part of your makeup, but you can learn to adapt to it and to make it work for you.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be incredibly helpful because,
Absolutely.
I know what it's like to feel in emotional distress and do have the tools to help calm myself down. But even there are times when it's really hard. So if that were a constant thing that was happening to me, that would be really stressful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
Mm.
there are also interpersonal effectiveness skills that teach people how to interact more effectively without burning bridges or feeling taken advantage of. And really, it teaches them how to interact with people and get their needs met.
Mm. Yeah. Well, another great skill, right?
Absolutely. And all of this is done under the umbrella of mindfulness. So Marsha Linehan actually based this in, kind of Zen Buddhist philosophies, based a lot of the skills in Zen Buddhist philosophies, and she learned mindfulness skills. And so, I teach people how to practice mindfulness either with meditation, mindful movement, with contemplative prayer, or just, being mindful in their everyday life with, having mindful conversations or just really being where they are when they're there, getting out of their head and all the judgments and interpretations that we have
Mm.
constantly and just getting back into your life.
Yeah. Yeah. So such an important skills. And I think sometimes they feel like so hard for people who are very stressed out or who have more significant mental health issues.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really hard to practice them initially. It's one of the, that's why they often call, it's mindfulness practice. You have
Hmm.
to really practice a long time, and it really changes the wiring in your brain after a while.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but you have to really buy into it, especially in the beginning, because I'm basically saying to people, I know you have all of these behaviors that work for you, but are not going to sustain you for your whole life. So we're going to work on giving up those behaviors and using some of these skills.
Yeah.
Um, that will sustain you, and maybe in the beginning, they're, like I said, are not going to be as effective. If cutting works for you, and I know that's kind of hard to think about for some people who don't understand it, but for some people, cutting really does work for them. But there's also so much shame and danger and all of that associated with it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I feel as if, personality disorders in general, but I think borderline personality disorder in particular,
Hmm.
really it can be so, they can be so stigmatizing. And that I've certainly had clients who, will come to therapy and say, I went to this other place and I got diagnosed with this, and this just feels so heavy. And, there's some shame to the
Hmm.
diagnosis for them just because of our culture, I think. But can you kind of define what personality disorders are, just to, I don't know, better normalize that this isn't just some terrible thing that you have to walk around and hide?
Sure, sure. So personality disorders in general are a group of mental disorders that are characterized by like rigid, unhealthy patterns of thinking, functioning, behaving, etc. But the thing is, they're often trauma based. And so people who have these disorders often have developed these patterns of behavior to protect them in whatever trauma situation that they were in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's also, it could have been, the trauma could be something extreme like sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, that sort of thing. It can also be the coupling of an invalidating environment with a really emotionally sensitive person. So if you grow up in a very harsh family that, this is how you do things, and you are emotionally sensitive to criticism, you could develop some of these develop a personality disorder.
Mm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And so some, like, borderline personality disorder is one of the diagnoses, right?
yes.
What else falls under personality disorders?
So there are multiple different types of personality disorders. There
Mhm.
are, along with borderline personality disorders, there is narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder.
Mhm.
And I will say that those seem, in my experience, to be often more given more often to men. Men
Mm.
are diagnosed with narcissistic or antisocial. Antisocial, if you are really a person with an antisocial personality disorder, that's very, very rare, first of all. And it's very hard to treat. It's extraordinarily hard to treat because you're literally someone who does not have the capacity for empathy. So it's a very sad way to be. So you literally walk around seeing every person as an object. You know, they are people, other human beings are objects for your pleasure, objects for your use. So that's a really very difficult, and usually somebody who's extraordinarily abused, unfortunately, is someone who, and also extremely, extremely rare. So narcissistic personality disorder is a little more common. It's where you have an elevated sense of yourself, your self-worth, you're grandiose. You might be very you exaggerate your abilities and your talents, and you really have a very difficult time seeing any flaws in yourself or hearing criticism. And more often than not, narcissistic personality disorders is a diagnosis given to men, whereas borderline personality disorder is given to women more often than not.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and the thought is that when a woman is expressing anger and emotional volatility, they're usually turning it inside into themselves. They're doing something to harm themselves, whereas men are acting out, projecting their frustrations and victimhood onto other people and blaming. And it's a different way of seeing things. So,
wow. And so when people come to you with, if they're struggling with personality, borderline personality disorder, for instance, how do you identify that, yep, this is what they're struggling with? And then what does therapy, or how do you help them learn how to better manage themselves, kind of their emotional regulation, their tolerance, all of that?
Well, I think that the most important thing when someone comes to me is to first develop a relationship, because there is no treatment without a trusting relationship. And a lot of people, especially with people with borderline personality disorder, have an intense fear of abandonment, and they've had a lot of very volatile, often dysfunctional relationships. So you work first to develop trust and develop the relationship. And once that's there, and once they're able to see that, as you're going to teach them these skills and help them let go of some of these maladaptive behaviors that have worked for them, that they will be able to trust you that you're going to replace those behaviors with something that will work differently for them and work better for them over the long haul.
Yeah. I know, personally, in my life, I've had some people close to me that I don't know their diagnoses, but based on just some of the stuff how they've behaved in relationship, it can be very hard to be in relationship with someone who has borderline personality disorder, because sometimes it can feel like at one moment everything is great, and then the next moment they're very angry with you or hurt or pissed off that you've done something and you don't know what that is. Do you find that, you said that oftentimes relationships are very difficult for them? Do you find that in your practice, that there's like struggle within family units and things like that?
Absolutely. Because, I mean, unfortunately, these patterns of behavior, and these are often learned behaviors, and they come from their family of origin. And not to blame the family of origin, but it's because their parents didn't understand how to regulate their emotions and manage their behaviors effectively, and parents before that, and generations often, and so. And the family of origin is often has created an invalidating environment. So I often work with families to teach them how to interact more effectively with their loved one. And really, the thing that I always say is that we have these explosions, and there's still going to be these explosions, especially in the beginnings of treatment. But you can always go back and repair. You can always return and say, you know what? When this happened, I overreacted, or I heard this, and I now can see that that wasn't the case. And let's, talk it out and fix it. And over time, doing that helps to repair the relationships and you teach each other how to interact with each other more effectively.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be incredibly helpful just long term, because we get reactive about stuff. And if you're particularly sensitive and reading.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things I see with a lot of my clients is they do something that I call filling in the gaps. So, you may have said, oh, I can't have lunch with you tomorrow. And they hear, I'm not good enough. You don't like me anymore. You don't want to have lunch with me, when all it is that you have a conflict and you mean to reschedule another time. But you know what I'm saying? So they fill in the gaps with all of these very self-reproachful things about them, about themselves, or maybe that you're not a nice enough person anymore, or you're getting ready to abandon them, so they're going to push you away. So it's really, just going back and having a gentle conversation can be very helpful. And knowing that, maybe you ended up picking up on something uncomfortable from them. Maybe often people with personality disorders are really good at projecting their uncomfortable emotions onto someone else. So you're absorbing it. And I've noticed that a lot in my work. And someone once said to me, one of my teachers, one of the trainers for DBT said, that feeling you get that just emotional angst that comes when you're with a person with a personality disorder, that's coming from them, that's happening within them a lot of the time. So all of that pain and angst and just confusion and just suffering. And so it really helped me to build a level of empathy, because I just think about that is excruciating. It's really, really uncomfortable and untenable over the long haul, which is why some people think about suicide, because it's the only way to conceivably escape that pain, that emotional pain.
Boy, that's sad.
Yeah, it is. It is. And the good news is we now have this amazing model of treatment that is effective. And there's a lot more research being done. And a lot of other people are really wanting, seeing this as a legitimate illness, not, just the fact that it's called a personality disorder sounds like there's something wrong with your personality, when really it's a trauma-based, as I said, disorder.
Yeah. And I think that's so important to stress that, most mental health disorders have some history, there's something, either biology or intergenerational trauma or outright trauma to you, that caused this disruption in your biology, neurobiology, your system, your emotional regulation, all of it. I think it helps, again, as you said, to have the empathy for the person who is struggling.
Just as you would have empathy for somebody struggling with a physical illness.
Right.
I really think it's important that we remember that if our brain can have difficulties just as much as our heart or our lungs or any other part of our body. So it's no wonder, but there's so much shame and guilt experienced by people who have mental illnesses, no matter what they are, often, that it's compounded by that stigmatization that happens in the society. So
people are so much less willing to talk about mental health and their own mental health than, like, say, if they had, I don't know, diabetes or a heart condition or whatever, eczema, anything.
Right. No, true. It's so true. It's so true. It's funny. I was just interviewing a person with a chronic physical illness, and I started talking about mental illness alongside of it. And I was like, I don't want to invalidate you by comparing the two. And then she was like, but they're both illnesses. They're both difficulties. So even as a professional, I sometimes, I don't want to upset anybody. I still tense up around that, and I want to work to do better.
Yeah, boy, I know. And I think, well, podcasts like yours and mine, I think help sort of normalize that the mental health stuff, the mental health struggles, like there are ways to heal from all of this, that is what's so important. And as hard as it is, and that it does take practice, it does take work on the part of, the person who is struggling, but you can heal.
Right. And Marsha Linehan, who is the founder of DBT, the creator of DBT, did it. She created it because she was suffering herself. She had been hospitalized for 2 years in just excruciatingly horrible conditions. I mean, and this was the state of the art of treatment back then. It was the 60s. And she was chronically suicidal, and she was self-injuring. And I think, honestly, the actual hospitalization created more trauma for her. It exacerbated her trauma rather than helping her. But when she got out, in an effort to help herself and then to go on and help others, she created this model of therapy. So, and she is now, a world-renowned researcher and therapist and writer, and she is, knock wood, I think, doing much, much better. So, and was able to recover. So that's the good news.
For sure. I did not know that. And that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So if people were wanting to know more about, dialectical behavior therapy or borderline personality disorder, or just all of what we've talked about today, are there resources that you would recommend for people to look into?
Absolutely. So you can go to Marsha Linehan's organization, behavioraltech.org. There is also the Borderline Personality Disorder Resource Center at New York Presbyterian Hospital, and the National Educational Alliance of Borderline Personality Disorder. And all of these organizations are continuing to do research. They have ways to find therapists. They have information. You can also feel free to contact me, RebekahShackney.com, and I'm happy to help lead you in the right direction if you have questions.
Oh, that's awesome. That was going to be my next question. How do people find you?
Oh.
Yeah. So RebekahShackney.com. And how else? Where else are you?
I am on Facebook and Twitter and all of those places, just at Rebekah Shackney. And I also have a podcast called A Therapist Takes Her Own Advice, which is available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. I'm just like yours. So
cool.
Yeah.
Very fun. Well, I so appreciate your taking the time to talk to us today and give us a little insight into borderline personality disorder and dialectical behavioral therapy.
Thanks so much, Biz. It was such a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Rebekah. I learned a lot about dialectical behavior therapy, which what I love about it, and I know a little bit about it. I have not been trained in it, but what I love about it is that it's a mindfulness-based therapy. And the research is showing that it's really effective to help people with borderline personality disorders, but also for people who struggle with emotional regulation, because there's so many great tools on managing difficult emotion, grounding yourself, emotional tolerance. It's just a really cool model. So if you want to know more about either the therapy or the disorder, you can go to the show notes at womanworriers.com. Click on the links to all the resources there. You can also find Rebekah's contact information and ways to sign up for my newsletter. and get your free Worried Women's Guide to Meditation. You can also leave me a voicemail with feedback about this episode or other episodes on the podcast. Go to womanwarriors.com, and at the bottom of the show notes, there is a link that says, leave me a voicemail. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a wonderful week. I hope you take care of yourselves. I hope you take care of your loved ones. Be kind to each other and to yourself. Ciao for now from this Woman Worrier.